listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. This episode is a conversation with someone you may already know, Marisa Renee Lee. Marisa was on the show a while back talking about her first book, Grief is Love, and the ways that she's committed to telling the truth about what grief actually feels like. She's back now with a new book called Waiting for Dawn, and in this conversation, we talk not just about the grief of when someone dies, but also from losing parts of ourselves. In 2024, Marisa got COVID, and it turned into long COVID, which dramatically impacted almost every aspect of her life, including her energy, her capacity, her work, and how she moves through the world. And alongside that, she's also experienced other losses, including the death of her beloved dog, Sadie, and the ongoing reality of missing her mom, who died when Marisa was 25. We talk about what it's like to live in a body that doesn't feel reliable, the loneliness that can come with illness, and what feels similar but also different about grieving for a death and grieving for a version of yourself that's no longer here. Marisa also shares about parenting through all of this, how she talks with her young son about death, about illness, and about what it means to love someone who isn't here anymore. As anyone familiar with Marisa knows, this episode is going to be heartfelt, funny, and so very accessible. Her new book, Waiting for Dawn, Living with Uncertainty, is out on April 7th, and it's one that I think we would all be better off for reading, especially right now. Okay, here's our conversation. Marisa, welcome back to the show. I am just thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me.
And for listeners who aren't familiar with you or your story or how you came to write your first book, Grief is Love, can you catch them up of why are you here having this conversation with us?
Yeah, I am the grief girl. I lost my mom when I was 25 in 2008, and I remember it was about 6 months after she died. I just felt like no one had actually explained what grief is like to me. You know, we had images from movies and TV shows. Everybody goes to the funeral and then everybody goes back to life, and it's almost as if the thing never even happened. And I just thought that was completely ridiculous. And so I decided in August of 2008 that I was going to write a book about grief and loss that would tell the truth about what grief actually is, how it feels, what it looks like, that wouldn't be sad and depressing, and that would be a New York Times bestseller. I didn't actually start the book until 2020, right after my husband and I had a really devastating pregnancy loss that, immediately took me back to the grief of losing my mom. And I realized in that moment that, there's nothing to get over. You don't get over it when you lose someone you love. You figure out how you're going to live with it. And I wrote an article for Glamour, Mother's Day weekend 2020, that basically presented that thesis. And it turned out a lot of people agreed with me. And by the end of the summer, I had a book deal, and Grief is Love came out in 2022. And my next book, which focuses on uncertainty, is out on April 7th of this year.
Yeah, new book, Waiting for Dawn, which I just had the pleasure of finishing reading this week. So really excited for it to be out in the world. This February was just another anniversary of your mom's death. Mm-hmm. And how did it land this year?
Unfortunately, I was super sick. I have long COVID. And then at the end of January, we all got whatever the germs were at school. My 4-year-olds, they just will cough right in your mouth. It's absolutely disgusting. And so I spent most of February sick, but still tried to hold space for reflection and also celebration, because the anniversary actually comes 10 days after her birthday. And so I always bake something. I have been obsessed with this olive oil from this farm up the road where I live in the Hudson Valley. And so I made an olive oil cake that I think she would have really liked. And I really liked it and ended up eating, most of the cake myself over the so weak. So it was, it was a little bit sad, but actually it's been 18 years and it was more surreal. Like the thing that I wrote on Instagram is, if my grief were a person, they could go to war and they would be driving and graduating from high
Mm.
school and maybe trying to sneak into a bar, and like that just seems so wild to me that like it's been that long since my mom and I were in this world together. So yeah, it surreal, honestly, was like the big feeling.
How have you tried to share your mom with your son?
Oh, we talk about her all the time. And the way he talks, you would think she's going to walk in the door like tomorrow. It's so natural. It's so lovely to see. I feel like people really struggle with kids and grief and death. And unfortunately, in the 4.5 years since we adopted our son, I lost both my grandparents, who he had met, and my grandmother in particular, he was really close with and spent a lot of time with, and that was a hard one for him. And we also lost my husband's mother, and so he's seen a lot of grief, and I think it has made him a better griever than a lot of adults that I know. He said, and this is going to be the title of my to be written children's book, like, I'm going to love you until forever. And when he said that to me, I was like, yes. I was like, that is exactly how I love my mom and how I know I am being loved in return. And seeing him like understand that was really cool. And he's also helped me with some of the things that I do to memorialize her. So she loved lilies. And to be clear, I do not have a green thumb. I'm not like some expert gardener or anything, but I can stick some bulbs in the ground and like dig a hole and throw a little bit of fertilizer on top. And you get these beautiful lilies in the spring. And like he knows that that's connected to his grandma Lisa. So yeah, he talks about her all the time, and it's funny. My dad was here sometime a couple months ago, and there's a picture of my mom in our kitchen from when she was like young, like early 20s, pre-mom years. And he pointed to the picture and he goes to my father, "Do you know her? Like, did you know her too?" Like, hadn't connected. Like, my mom was married to your pop, who's like my father. So yeah, kids will keep you guessing.
Well, it makes me want to ask a question that so many parents struggle with and call us all the time. And I have my like answers I give them, but to talk to someone who's doing it in real time, your family has experienced a number of losses since your son has come into your life. How do you tell him? Like what are the words that you use to share about his
Yeah.
family members who died?
So I have the benefit of having a best friend and college roommate who is a clinical psychologist. And so the one that we really felt like we had to prepare for actually wasn't a person. It was our dog who passed away at the end of 2024. And my husband and I, had planned to have a vet come to the house while our son was at school and, let Sadie pass comfortably at home. And so it was like, okay, like we need to figure out what exactly we're going to tell this kid when he comes home. And so the language we used is Sadie's body stopped working and she died. So she's not here anymore, for us to play with and, give her dinner and take her for walks, but you can still love her. You can still talk about her. She definitely still loves you. And, unfortunately, this is just what happens. Like, I'm sorry that this is just what happens, but this is just what happens. And he said okay and seemed totally fine with it until bedtime when I am both, grieving and exhausted and have been taking care of this sick dog as a sick person for the last couple of weeks. And that's when he started asking the questions, can you make her body work again? Like, no, that's not how it works. When somebody dies, like their body is completely shut down and it's gone. And he was like, okay. And like, he really had to sit with it, but he got it and, went to pick him up from school the next day, and he had told everyone, all these other little kids, that Sadie had died and her body stopped working. And I was like, oh my God, am I going to get text messages from like every parent in the class? But his teachers were like, it was like really nice to see.
Yeah, so here you are committed in your young adulthood to telling the truth about grief. And now your son is carrying on the family tradition of telling the truth about grief and
Oh
loss.
yeah, telling everybody. Like, he did the
As they
same
do.
thing when my grandma passed away over the summer. Like the teachers at school were like, "We're sorry for your loss." I was like, "Oh my God, he came to school, told you his great grandma died." Okay. So yeah, that's Bennett.
Can we talk about Sadie for a moment?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
what our dog Captain died December 8th, 2024. And then I saw that
Oh,
Sadie died in December 2024. I didn't know what day.
yes. I believe it was the 10th. Like off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it was the 10th because we we realized something was wrong when my husband noticed like a little bit of blood in her water dish. And again, the benefit of personal and family connections. I have a cousin who's a vet, and I texted her. It was the weekend. I was like, what do you think? Like, how concerned should we be? And she was like, well, honestly, I'm actually pretty concerned, especially given her age. She was about 14. And she was like, I want you to call this practice where she used to work. And she's like, they'll get you in right away. And so, of course, that Monday, I call first thing. I am sick with long COVID. I have a sick kid home with me and a sick dog, but they're like, can you get here in 15 minutes? Rushed in, and we learned that she had a mass, like sort of like in the back of her throat that at the time was the size of a small plum. And like you just feel so bad because animals can't complain. Like, they can't tell you anything. And she was playing normally and eating normally and like, pretty much being herself, like an older dog self, but normal. And so they said they thought with medication, we'd maybe get a couple of months, but a couple weeks later we could tell she was just in pain and barely able to give her like her medicine. She didn't even want to eat treats anymore. And my husband and I were like, we're not doing this. Like there's no reason for her to suffer unnecessarily. And so putting a dog down a couple weeks before Christmas is like the saddest thing ever. But I know that we did the right thing for her. And that was what we tried to prioritize, like throughout those last couple of weeks when we knew she was on her way out. Like this dog has been so good to us for the last 12 years. Like, how are we going to make sure that we do right by her?
I'm wondering, with the death of your mom, the death of Sadie, your dog, your mother in law had died, your grandparents have died, your cousin Amani was
Yeah.
killed. You've had so many deaths in your life. How how does the grief around Sadie's death feel in comparison, even though it's weird to use the word comparison,
Yeah.
to other deaths
Yeah.
that you've experienced?
It was interesting. You know, like I said, she'd been with us for 12 years. This was the first dog that I ever had. And my, now husband and we had been dating for like 6 months. He moved in, and a couple months later, we got a puppy. Like it was completely ridiculous. But once we got the dog, I said, okay, like we're just gonna have to get married because I'm not gonna co-parent a dog with you. Like that's not happening. I'm not giving up my dog. And so it was really hard. Like it hit harder than I expected it to because I knew for 3 weeks or so like what was happening. We also knew she was up there in terms of dog years, and we probably wouldn't have her much longer. Like that was always kind of in the back of the mind the last couple of years. But then, to not have her at all was just, I mean, it was just devastating, especially for me at the time because I was mostly homebound because I was so sick. And she was my company. Like she was the person who was like laying beside me when I was watching back-to-back episodes of Emily in Paris because I was too sick to do anything else with my life. And like in her absence, you realize how incredibly generous animals are. You know, like once you are their person, they're just there and they just offer up love in like a very straightforward and uncomplicated way that is always going to be different from human relationships, right? And so I thought it wasn't going to be as bad as it was, to be honest, until it happened. And I was like, oh no, this super sucks. And like this sucks in like a different way than when you lose a person. And I definitely also felt like, and was questioning like, did I do enough when this dog was around to express my appreciation for the role that she played in our family? Like she was just such a good dog. We suddenly one day brought home a newborn baby and she had to adjust to that reality. And instead of avoiding this like screaming, irrational, crazy like newborn, whoever was on the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift with the baby, she was there. Like she was like right in the middle of it, like at lying at your feet on the couch or like lying on the couch. Like she like wanted to be a part of everything. And yeah, she was just a really special dog.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece around a pet that they can be so woven into the fabric of just
Yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
sometimes they sort of fade a little into the background, but they're always there.
Yeah.
And then when they're not there, you're like, there is a huge hole
Yeah.
in the house
Huge
that
gap.
wasn't
Huge
there
gap.
before.
I still have moments. I don't know if this happens to you, but like I still have moments where I'll come home from something and think that I'm going to be greeted at the door by a dog. And like that's not the reality, obviously. So yeah, it has been an adjustment, but at this point we've decided like we are fully ready for another dog, and so we're going to start the search soon.
Hopefully, Sadie will be supporting you in that process from
Oh,
wherever
for
she is.
sure. For sure.
She might have some opinions about who
Yes,
comes in
yes.
next.
Yes, she definitely will.
Well, your new book, Waiting for Dawn, and it seems like the general theme is like, how do we live with uncertainty and how do we create space and structure to care for ourselves, which is great for everybody all the time, right? Like we all need more of that. There's a ton of
Yeah.
uncertainty in the world. And it seemed like very specifically for you connected to the long COVID that the diagnosis you received in 2024 and just like living with that uncertainty. So I wondered if we could talk a little about, are there parallels that you've found between grieving when you have a diagnosis like long COVID, grieving for your health, grieving for your capacity, and grieving for the death of a person or grieving for Sadie?
Yeah, I felt like it was different in the sense that, when you are grieving, like whether it's the pet or the parent or the spouse or the child, like there is something more external about the grief, because it's a human being that existed separate from you. Whereas this, I felt like I was the loss. Like I have to live inside this grief because there's no escaping or changing the situation or taking a break from it or anything like that. Like I just have to figure out how to live well in this space of constant grief and uncertainty. I I've gone back and forth and I don't think I have an answer yet. Not that it necessarily requires one, but I keep asking myself, like, is this worse than when I lost my mom when I was younger? And in some ways, I think yes, because it is, it's like a little bit more destabilizing around your individual identity. And then also at this phase of life, I'm not just responsible for Marissa. Like at 25, I was just responsible for Marissa. And, not that this was the best reaction, but like if I was having a bad day in terms of my mom and grief, like I could just go out with my friends or coworkers and get super drunk and at least forget about it for a couple hours. Like, it like was not like the right thing to do necessarily, but for a 25-year-old, it's like totally reasonable. There is none of that here. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's, I don't really drink very much anymore at all, just because of like how the long COVID works in the body, and what my body needs. And I can't take a respite from it. Like I remember going to Puerto Rico 6 weeks after my mom died. And then My godmother sent me and some friends to Hawaii like a few months later. Like there were these like spaces at least where I could be and, give myself room to heal and just have fun. And with this, it's been a lot harder to access that because my body is so weak and like there's no break from the pain. Like I have woken up in some amount of pain pretty much every day since early 2024. And that breaks my brain a little bit. And then when you add to that the fact that in this situation, my responsibilities are real. Like I am the primary breadwinner here. Like I have a mortgage to pay. I have a kid who has a part-time nanny because I can only do so much in this season, like, and so that has been really challenging.
It's such an important point of like never being able to get away from
No,
it.
no, I never get away. Like I took a break sort of one day. I was very, 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 very committed to making it to the Beyonce Cowboy Carter concert last summer. And made it there and even had a friend, my friend Emily, bless her heart, who managed to like get us a box. So like I had a seat where I could put my feet up and was protected from the rain and like it was truly the best of circumstances on so many levels, but it was too much walking. So like I was in pain the whole time that I was there and it took about 5 days to recover from that one night of a concert. And so it's like even when I kind of have tried to build in breaks, it hasn't always worked out so well. And so just figuring out how to accept a painful life while moving forward to something better has been my primary focus these last few years.
What are a few of the footholds that you found to be able to live in that place of, I think you said accepting, living a painful life?
Yeah. Yeah. Some of it is like faith and like my commitment to my faith. And then connected to that is just hope. And I don't mean hope in the sense of, synonym for optimism. I mean, really believing that if I do the right things, they may not add up to me feeling better tomorrow, but they will add up to me feeling better in a month, in 3 months, in 6 months, etc. And thankfully, that's what I've seen over the last year. And the hardest thing for me is that, like, the most important thing in this process has been rest and just being still. And that is completely out of alignment with my personality. But like when you find yourself in a state of uncertainty, like you have to figure out like what is going to help me get better or get through it. And it may be things that are uncomfortable or that are, new or different or unexpected. But if you want to get through it, well, like you have to do those things. I also have tried to reach for like smaller joys. I have a friend, Cindy Spiegel. She's an author and she writes about micro joys, like these, like just brief little things that can carry you through. And so I've started playing around with watercolors and this is so dorky, but I got a potholder loom and I can like weave and make pot holders for people. Like it's so random. But it was something that I could do without like taxing my body or my mind. And that felt productive. So yeah, it's been, oh, and help. Like I ask for and accept a lot of help, free and paid from family and friends, near and far, from colleagues. Like I have had to get very comfortable accepting weakness.
Originally I'd asked you, are there parallels between grieving when you have a chronic condition and grieving for a person? And we talked about how different they were. But one thing I'm hearing you say that sounds familiar is recognizing just how changed people can be
Yes.
by a death.
Yes.
And it can change our sense of self, it can change our values, it can change our capacities, and that there can be this grief for who I used to be in addition to grieving
Yeah.
for the person. And I wondered with your mom's death when you were younger, if there were things you discovered of like, oh, I can't keep doing the thing I've always done. I have to do something different.
Well, I think what I did wrong for the first, like, I don't know, probably like 3 years, I kept trying to get back to a person who no longer existed. Like I wanted to be the Marissa before she became, the motherless daughter. And like that just isn't possible. And so I think like having that understanding from the loss experience has been helpful in the long COVID experience because I know I am a completely different person now than I was in January of 2024. Like completely different. And I'm okay with that. Like I see the growth as a positive thing. Do I wish I didn't have to have long COVID to like learn a lot of life lessons? Yeah, but like it is what it is. So yeah, so that like accepting the transformative power of hardship, whether it's grief, uncertainty, or something else, I think is really important because it allows you to stop fighting to get something or to get to someone who no longer exists.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, and this might just be very selfish and personal of me, so
It's
I'll share
okay.
a little bit about mine and you'll see if you have any thoughts about it. But one thing that happened for me with, Captain died in December of 2024. And then in February of 2025, I just went in for my normal annual optometrist appointment. They say like, oh, your contact's working. And I was like, there's something a little funky in this one eye. And that started this whole process to find out I have this weird thing called vitreous macular traction in my left eye, which creates this like disturbance in my vision in my one eye. And it sparked panic for me, right? This panic of like, I'm going to lose my vision. I'm not going to be able to work. I'm not going to be able to drive. I'm not going to be able to be independent, like all this spinning out. And I realized after about a month of that the condition and the emotions around the condition stole from me the ability to really sit in my grief around Captain. And I recognized how much having like a medical condition was interrupting and creating this obstacle to accessing the grief for a loss in my life that wasn't related to that condition.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered for you, because I know you had a number of deaths while dealing with long COVID, if you experienced anything similar.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say with Sadie, I felt like I gave myself permission to grieve, and I also knew that unfortunately that loss was going to negatively impact my health because anything that stresses the body is bad for long COVID, basically. And so it was hard because, I knew I was in more pain because of the grief. And when I would, kind of recognize that and try to reckon with it, that was also when I would kind of tell myself, you were so lucky to have her. Like this sucks, but like it's all temporary and you wouldn't change anything about like that dog and your relationship with her. And so like you kind of have to be okay with having like sort of additional grief because of the more pain. With my grandmother's passing, the thing that was upsetting for me, that's sort of similar to what you're describing, is I had to reckon with the fact that if I hadn't had long COVID, I would have seen her more that last year of her life. And I know that that's not anything that like she or anybody else would ever hold against me, but just practically speaking, there were a lot of weekends when I was not strong enough to leave my house. And if I was, I might have to like take my kid to something else in a different part of town, which would mean I wouldn't have the energy to go to like the part of town where she lives, 20 minutes in the other direction and spend time with her. So like that was disappointing. Like, and in that sense, I felt like my illness robbed me from having, a few more afternoons with her and my kid. And they were, oh my God, they were so hilarious together. Like just making fun of each other and laughing and being loud. And like, I mean, they were just so funny. Like my son will just randomly be like, "Remember when great grandma always used to say this thing or she'd say that thing or she'd laugh really funny." Like he's talking about it now and I'm like, "Oh, I just wish I could have given you more."
Mm.
So in that sense, like yes.
Another thing I think about with both grieving a death and grieving having a chronic illness or a condition of some type is the loneliness that can come with that.
Oh yeah.
Of it's not always obvious to other people, and even when it is obvious to other people, it's not always easy to find people who understand what you're going through or can validate or connect with your experience. What's been your relationship with that kind of loneliness?
Oh, it was awful. There was a period of, I would say, like about 6 months, maybe even a little bit longer, where talking was very challenging, like crazy chest pain, shortness of breath. At one point, my lungs were so tight and the asthma was so bad that they were concerned that like maybe there was some other kind of blockage happening there. Another time, my larynx was blocked over 70%. So like the air, it just like it wasn't traveling properly at all. And when your body is not able to distribute oxygen properly, like that's a problem. And so I couldn't talk to my friends. Forget about like, going out to dinner or visiting people or even having people visit me. Like I couldn't do any of it. I mean, it was devastatingly lonely. And there wasn't really a whole lot I could do about it because of the not being able to talk for very long. Because, like, for me, at the end of the day, if I think that today I can talk for like an hour or 90 minutes without it being a problem, I had to save that time for my kid, my husband, my work. I couldn't give it to my friends or accept it from them. And so that was really hard. Like I remember during that period, my childhood best friend who also works with me, she and her husband and their girls stopped at our house. It was around Thanksgiving break and they were at our house for like I think it was about 90 minutes and she knew how sick I was, so like she was like watching the clock the whole time and it was so lovely. But after they left, I was like so happy to see them, but I was so exhausted. And I had to recover for like a day and a half from a 90-minute visit. And then there was also just this, and I think this happens a lot when we're grieving the loss of someone we love, this feeling of like being behind or being off track in terms of like life milestones and that sort of thing. And I had to finally get to a place where I could say, like, not every track is the same. And if there are things that you believe are meant for you, you're not going to miss out on them. Like they will come around when the time is actually right. Because the time isn't right when you're deep in a recent loss or, super physically unwell.
Seems like going back to that faith that you have just in the course of things.
Yeah, like it's whatever is meant for you is meant for you. I decided I was going to write a best-selling grief book in 2008. That didn't actually happen until 2022. You know what I mean? Like,
You've learned to have patience with the
yeah, yeah.
unfolding of
Lots of
that.
other fun things happened in between, to be clear. Like, but it takes time sometimes.
What I know of you is you are a producer and a hustler. I don't mean like hustler and like,
No, no, no,
putting
no.
things over on people, but like getting a lot done and producing a lot and being a very high performing person. And when grief comes, when long COVID comes, there's interruptions in that
Yeah,
ability to produce at that level. And then I think about who in our society gets more of a privilege to rest and to not produce. And I just wondered for you as a Black woman in the US how that all plays out in terms of the pressure to produce and then also needing to step back from producing that much.
yeah. I mean, it took a while for me to get comfortable with the idea that like I can't work like that right now. And I finally had to say to myself, like, yes, the work that you do in the world matters. My consulting is pretty much all like equity, social justice, politics, etc. And then, my writing focused on grief and loss and uncertainty and healing. This stuff matters. Like it's definitely important, especially at this moment of time in our country, but it's not more important than like your body. Like if you're not well, if you don't get well, you're not going to be able to produce in the ways that you want to anyway. So like you just have to sit the fuck down. Like that there's no two ways about it. Like you don't have a choice if you want to continue to contribute to the world in the ways that you feel you're meant to. Like right now you're in timeout, but you'll get back out there. And then from a privilege standpoint, as hard as navigating long COVID and, the ridiculous US healthcare system and navigating it as like a business owner and a mother and having all of these responsibilities, at the end of the day, I had to acknowledge that in terms of privilege, I am just about as privileged as a Black woman can be in America. I had the economic privilege to hire a part-time nanny, to pay for treatments out of pocket, to go to acupuncture, to set up extra therapy sessions when I was feeling stronger, like to pay for more delivery meals, like whatever I needed to throw money at, like I could for the most part, And I thought about that a lot because there are just so many people who are suffering with like any variety of physical or mental health challenges, and they do not have the same privilege, they do not have the same access, and it's really enraging. I want our country to be better at centering the care of human beings, but in a nation that is so deeply committed to capitalism and white supremacy, you just don't get that. And so I think it's incumbent upon those of us who do have some measure of privilege to also advocate for those who don't. And so one of the things that I have been able to do with both Grief is Love and Waiting for Dawn in this, crappy long COVID situation. I've partnered with funders and also with a researcher and bereavement professor at Harvard to produce some research on like, the first study was about how can we better support Black and brown kids who lost caregivers in the pandemic. Because you know all of the horrible outcomes that happen to these children when they lose a primary caregiver. It's like bad in every way, like the economics, the education, the violence stuff, like it all increases. And then the next project is going to focus on, how can we better support people who are dealing with uncertainty, and then like a sort of sub focus is new disability, to go from being perfectly able, or even some might argue like extra able, to not able at all. It is an interesting experience.
One last question for you
Yeah.
before we talk a little bit about your book being out in the world. Your mom, before she died, had dealt with health conditions for years, and you were a caregiver for her for many of those years. What did you learn from watching your mom go through that experience that you've either carried into your experience of dealing with long COVID or have worked against doing and carrying into your experience of
Yeah.
long COVID?
So it's so interesting because, I was really young. Like my mom first got sick 30 years ago this year. So I was only 13. And at the time, I remember feeling like, and like my memories are like, she basically did everything perfectly. And I'm like, that's probably some grief, like rose colored glasses. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, there's just no way. There's no way this woman who was Sunday school teacher, like PTA, jazzercise, super efficient mom of two, and then suddenly gets sick one day and is on disability a couple months later. And then a few years later, we learn that she has permanent brain damage and multiple sclerosis. Like, there's no way she did all that perfectly. But the things that I remember are her comfort around asking for help, especially once she had breast cancer. Like she was very good at it. And she seemed very comfortable at accepting it. She also seemed, and I'll have to ask my dad if this is actually true or not, but she seemed comfortable when she needed it. And this was, as the MS was the relapsing remitting type. And sometimes it was worse and sometimes it was a little bit better. And when it was worse, like, she attended my high school graduation in a wheelchair, for instance. I know there's no way she loved it, but she modeled as though it
Mm.
was perfectly fine. And I think now as a parent, that was more of a parent move than like the reality. But it like has made me feel like I need to be more comfortable with the things that I need and with asking for help because she, did such a good job at it, whether that's real or not. And she also this one I know is real. She was deeply committed to having fun and like creating joy for herself, for her kids, for my dad, for friends. And she was incredibly vain, like no apologies. I had to cancel a nail appointment after she died because at the end of her life, the woman's no longer undergoing active treatment for breast cancer or MS, but she's still having a manicurist come to the house to do her nails. So like that was real, real. Yeah.
I said that was the last question, but now I have one more. It'll be
Okay.
a short one though. And like being a caregiver for your mom, watching her deal with her MS and then a breast cancer diagnosis. What are the ways that you're talking to your son about your experience with long COVID to support him?
Yes, we've had to be very careful because I think in the beginning he definitely had a bit of anxiety around it and was kind of thinking that anytime somebody got sick, they might be sick for like a really long time. I remember this one night he was crying. He just had a cold, like a silly kid cold. This is about a year ago. And he's crying and like, I don't want to be sick. I don't want, and my husband and I are looking at each other like, what is going on right now? And he goes, I just don't want to be sick forever and ever. And we looked at each other and we're like, oh, yikes. And so, we had to have some conversations and like, mommy doesn't feel good right now, but like she's going to be fine. Like, and you keep it light and it's not a big deal. But he has also been really good at adapting because of my husband's work schedule. He's a professor at a college around here. I am the primary person who takes Bennett to school, and that has been the case throughout my entire illness. My kid is a bruiser. Like he's just like a solid, muscular 4-year old. And he's been like that his entire life. And so I can remember being like, I can't pick him up, or like I can, but like I'm gonna pay for it and it's gonna be really bad. And so fall of 2024, I was like, you're gonna climb into the car and climb into your car seat. And he did it. And it was also one of those moments where I was like, kids can do like whatever you expect them to do. And when they do something that is like, that they perceive as being harder or a challenge and they're able to do it and do it well, like they're so proud. And so he was super proud of himself, thinking like, oh, I'm this big kid climbing into my car seat. And I was just like, thank God, because you're chubby. Like, I can't pick you up.
Well, I appreciate you sharing about needing to distinguish for him what the word sick means in different
Yeah.
contexts, and we talk to parents and caregivers about that. If you say that grandpa died because he was sick, we have to give that sickness a name.
Yeah,
Otherwise, kids can start to think like anytime somebody gets a cold that they're also going to die.
exactly.
Well, your book, Waiting for Dawn, coming out April 7th. What are your dreams for it being out in the world?
I would like this book to land in the hands of millions of people because unfortunately, we are navigating a period of collective uncertainty. And I think that this book, it's not a step by step, like this is what you do and you'll feel better. It's more of a compass for navigating uncertainty when it happens to you. It's not a book about long COVID. It's a book about coping with overwhelming stress related to the unknown. Like that's how I define uncertainty in the book. And it has extensive research as well that like support the recommendations so that it's not just Marissa's story of her life the last few years. The other thing that I'll say about the book, there are a lot of heavy topics, obviously, but it's pretty hilarious too. So I promise if you read it, you're not going to be thinking all doom and gloom.
Absolutely not. I can attest to that, listeners. And as you just know by having listened to Marisa for the last 45 minutes, that there's no way you could write a book that would just
No,
be all doom and gloom. It would not, that could not happen. So,
absolutely not.
well, thank you, Marisa, for making time in your schedule to come talk with me to share with our listeners about all various aspects of grief and about your new book, Waiting for Dawn. I'm just
Of course.
grateful that you're here and a voice in this field. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
And listeners out there, you know, I say this to you each and every time. I'm so grateful you're tuning in, that you're listening to the show, sharing episodes with people who might be interested in or helped by the conversations that we are having here. You can always reach out to me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's dougy.org. That's our main website. If you head there, you'll find information about our local programming, all of our free downloadable resources, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. And in addition, you'll find information about all of our trainings that we have for people who are wanting to learn how to be better supporters of kids and teens and students who are grieving. We have online learning and webinars, so head to the website to find out more about that. Always excited to share, the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.